Join our community and dive into chilling horror tales that will steal your breath away. Subscribe, ring the notification bell, and brace yourself for a journey into the unknown. They say every family has secrets, but some secrets are buried so deep they fester, spreading roots into the lives of those who come after. And then there are families like the Halberts, whose secrets didn't stay buried, not even in death. Tonight we're stepping into the shadow of Hollow Hill, where the ground itself seems to whisper warnings to those foolish enough to listen. This is the story of the Halberts, a name that once inspired fear and now haunts the edges of forgotten history. But before we begin, let me warn you, some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Imagine standing at the edge of a crumbling, dirt road, staring up at an old farmhouse perched atop a hill. Its windows are dark, its roof sagging under decades of neglect. Yet something feels wrong. You can't quite place it at first. Is it the faint smell of damp earth clinging to the air? Or the way the wind seems to stop dead as you approach, leaving only an oppressive silence? Then you hear it, a low murmur, like voices carried from somewhere far below. And suddenly, you realize the house isn't empty. Not entirely. Our tale begins in 1847, when Ezekiel Halbert, a farmer turned preacher, claimed he had been chosen by God to protect his family from eternal damnation. At least that's what he told the townsfolk. What they didn't know was that Ezekiel's faith had taken a dark turn. He believed the souls of the dead could be bound to the living if only their bodies remained close enough. Ezekiel's wife, Abigail, was the first to die. Cholera swept through the region, claiming her life along with dozens of others. But unlike the rest, Abigail's body never left the Halbert home. Neighbors assumed she'd been buried in the churchyard. They were wrong. Ezekiel kept her body in the cellar, wrapped in linen soaked in herbs and prayers scrawled on parchment. She watches over us, he would say, his eyes gleaming with fervor. Her spirit protects this land. At first, the townspeople dismissed Ezekiel as eccentric. After all, grief makes people do strange things. But soon, rumors began to spread. Children playing near the hill swore they saw figures moving inside the house long after sunset. Farmers claimed their livestock bolted whenever they passed the property. Even the local pastor avoided the place, muttering about unholy practices and things best left undisturbed. Then came the disappearances. One by one, travelers and wanderers vanished without a trace. Each time Ezekiel offered the same explanation. God calls whom he wills. But behind closed doors, the Halbert household grew quieter, darker. Ezekiel's children, once lively and curious, became pale and withdrawn. They rarely ventured outside, and when they did, their eyes darted nervously, as if expecting someone, or something, to follow them. By 1853, 5 years after Abigail's death, Ezekiel declared the family complete. No more outsiders married into the Halbert bloodline. No more visitors crossed the threshold. The house became a fortress, its secrets locked away beneath the layers of superstition and fear. Yet even as the world forgot about the Halberts, the whispers lingered. Because deep down, everyone knew, the Halberts weren't just hiding from the world. They were hiding something far worse. The cellar beneath the house became Ezekiel's sanctuary and his prison. It was here that he performed rituals designed to bind the spirits of the dead to the living. Candles flickered in the damp air as he chanted prayers written in languages no one else understood. On the walls, crude symbols were carved into the stone, their meanings lost to time. And on the shelves, row upon row of jars lined the space, each containing fragments of the deceased. Fingers, hearts, locks of hair, all preserved in murky liquid as though waiting for something or someone to awaken them. But not everyone in the family shared Ezekiel's devotion. His youngest daughter, Lydia, often pleaded with him to let the dead rest. "They're not watching over us," she whispered one evening, tears streaming down her face. "They're angry." Lydia's warnings went unheeded. Instead, Ezekiel doubled down on his practices, convinced that any resistance came from weakness, not wisdom. And then, one fateful winter, tragedy struck again. A traveling salesman named Jacob Hensley disappeared near Hollow Hill. His horse was found wandering aimlessly, its saddlebags torn open. Search parties combed the woods but found nothing until weeks later, when a child stumbled upon a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush. The fabric bore Jacob's initials. Whispers spread like wildfire. Suspicion fell on the Halberts, whose isolation and odd behavior had long fueled gossip. Authorities visited the estate demanding answers. Ezekiel met them at the door, calm and composed. "My family has done nothing wrong," he assured them. "If anything ill has befallen Mr. Hensley, it is the work of forces beyond our control." The authorities left unsatisfied but unable to act without evidence. Yet their visit marked the beginning of the end. Within months, Lydia vanished. Her bed was neatly made, her belongings untouched. Only a single note remained, scrawled hastily on the back of a hymnal. "Forgive me, Father, for I cannot stay." Ezekiel searched tirelessly for his daughter, scouring the woods and questioning neighbors. But deep down, he suspected the truth. Lydia hadn't run away. She had joined the others in the cellar. As the years passed, the Halbert legacy grew darker. Stories of ghostly apparitions and disembodied cries haunted the town. Parents warned their children never to stray too close to Hollow Hill. And yet, despite the warnings, the disappearances continued. Each victim added another soul to the collection, another voice to the chorus of the damned. By the turn of the century, the Halbert name had become synonymous with terror. But the worst was yet to come. In 1906, a young couple camping near Hollow Hill went missing. Their tent was found shredded, their belongings scattered. Once again, suspicion turned to the Halberts. This time, however, authorities uncovered something undeniable: footprints leading directly to the house. When confronted, Thomas Halbert, Ezekiel's grandson, admitted to finding the couple injured and bringing them inside, but insisted they had fled before dawn. The truth emerged days later, when investigators discovered a locked room in the attic. Inside lay fragments of clothing, jewelry, and personal items belonging to multiple victims. Among them was a locket engraved with the names of the missing couple. Confronted with the evidence, Thomas broke down, confessing to everything. "They begged me to let them go," he sobbed. "But the voices, and they wouldn't stop. They said I had to bring them here. They said the family needed them." Thomas was arrested, tried, and sentenced to life imprisonment. Ezekiel died shortly thereafter, leaving Eleanor, his niece, as the sole survivor of the Halbert line. Alone in the house, she vowed to break the cycle. One by one, she removed the jars and wrapped bodies from the cellar, burying them in unmarked graves far from Hollow Hill. Yet even as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. By the time Eleanor finished, the house felt different, quieter, colder, as though the spirits had retreated but not forgiven. For decades, the Halbert estate stood abandoned. Locals avoided the area, claiming the ground itself felt cursed. Weeds swallowed the yard, vines crept over the windows, and the roof collapsed under the weight. Neglected. It seemed the family's dark legacy had been erased by time. But history has a way of resurfacing, and now, nearly 2 centuries later, we stand on the precipice of uncovering their darkest secret, a secret that proves some families don't just bury their dead, they keep them close. Too close. What lies beneath Hollow Hill? And what happens when the living dare to disturb the dead? The Halbert estate stood unchanged for decades, its walls absorbing the weight of untold horrors. By the late 1800s, the family had grown smaller but no less secretive. Those who dared glance at the house from afar described it as a tomb, a monument to decay and despair. Few realized how literal that description truly was. It was during this time that Ezekiel's son, Caleb, took over as head of the household. Unlike his father, Caleb lacked charisma. His sermons were short, his gaze hollow. Yet there was something unnerving about him, a quiet intensity that made neighbors uneasy. When asked about the family's reclusive nature, Caleb simply replied, "We have our duties." Those duties, it turns out, involved the cellar. Deep beneath the house lay a labyrinth of stone corridors, each lined with crude wooden shelves. On these shelves rested the remains of the Halbert dead, dozens of them, some wrapped in cloth, others encased in jars filled with murky liquid, all preserved in eerie stillness, as though waiting for something or someone to awaken them. Caleb believed the spirits of the departed could influence the living. Through rituals performed in the dead of night, he claimed to communicate with them, seeking guidance and protection. But not everyone in the family shared his devotion. His youngest sister, Lydia, often pleaded with him to let the dead rest. "They're not watching over us," she whispered one evening, tears streaming down her face. "They're angry." Lydia's warnings went unheeded. Instead, Caleb doubled down on his practices, convinced that any resistance came from weakness, not wisdom. And then, one fateful winter, tragedy struck again. A traveling salesman named Jacob Hensley disappeared near Hollow Hill. His horse was found wandering aimlessly, its saddlebags torn open. Search parties combed the woods but found nothing, until weeks later, when a child stumbled upon a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush. The fabric bore Jacob's initials. Whispers spread like wildfire. Suspicion fell on the Halberts, whose isolation and odd behavior had long fueled gossip. Authorities visited, the estate demanding answers. Caleb met them at the door, calm and composed. "My family has done nothing wrong," he assured them. "If anything ill has befallen Mr. Hensley, it is the work of forces beyond our control." The authorities left unsatisfied but unable to act without evidence. Yet their visit marked the beginning of the end. Within months, Lydia vanished. Her bed was neatly made, her belongings untouched. Only a single note remained, scrawled hastily on the back of a hymnal. "Forgive me, Father, for I cannot stay." Caleb searched tirelessly for his sister, scouring the woods and questioning neighbors. But deep down, he suspected the truth. Lydia hadn't run away. She had joined the others in the cellar. As the years passed, the Halbert legacy grew darker. Stories of ghostly apparitions and disembodied cries haunted the town. Parents warned their children never to stray too close to Hollow Hill. And yet, despite the warnings, the disappearances continued. Each victim added another soul to the collection, another voice to the chorus of the damned. By the turn of the century, the Halbert name had become synonymous with terror. But the worst was yet to come. In 1906, a young couple camping near Hollow Hill went missing. Their tent was found shredded, their belongings scattered. Once again, suspicion turned to the Halberts. This time, however, authorities uncovered something undeniable: footprints leading directly to the house. When confronted, Thomas Halbert, Ezekiel's grandson, admitted to finding the couple injured and bringing them inside, but insisted they had fled before dawn. The truth emerged days later, when investigators discovered a locked room in the attic. Inside lay fragments of clothing, jewelry, and personal items belonging to multiple victims. Among them was a locket engraved with the names of the missing couple. Confronted with the evidence, Thomas broke down, confessing to everything. "They begged me to let them go," he sobbed. "But the voices, they wouldn't stop. They said I had to bring them here. They said the family needed them." Thomas was arrested, tried, and sentenced to life imprisonment. Caleb died shortly thereafter, leaving Eleanor, his niece, as the sole survivor of the Halbert line. Alone in the house, she vowed to break the cycle. One by one, she removed the jars and wrapped bodies from the cellar, burying them in unmarked graves far from Hollow Hill. Yet even as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. By the time Eleanor finished, the house felt different. Quieter, colder, as though the spirits had retreated, but not forgiven. For decades, the Halbert estate stood abandoned. Locals avoided the area, claiming the ground itself felt cursed. Weeds swallowed the yard, vines crept over the windows, and the roof collapsed under the weight of neglect. It seemed the family's dark legacy had been erased by time. But history has a way of resurfacing. In 1972, a group of urban explorers stumbled upon the ruins. Drawn by tales of hauntings and mysterious disappearances, They documented their findings in grainy photographs and shaky video footage. What they captured shocked even the skeptics. Shadowy figures moving in the background, disembodied whispers echoing through empty halls, and inexplicable cold spots that defied explanation. One member of the group, Sarah Monroe, became particularly obsessed. She returned repeatedly, determined to uncover the truth. Her research led her to crumbling records and faded newspaper clippings detailing the Halbert tragedy. Piece by piece, she reconstructed the family's story, but not without consequences. Sarah began experiencing vivid nightmares. In them, she wandered the halls of the Halbert house, pursued by unseen entities. Voices whispered her name, urging her to come closer. During the day, she felt drained, as though something were siphoning her energy. Friends noticed changes in her behavior. Her once bright eyes grew dull, her laughter forced. Still, she pressed on, convinced she was close to unraveling the mystery. Then came the night she entered the cellar. Armed with a flashlight and recorder, Sarah descended into the darkness. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and carried the faint scent of earth and decay. As she moved deeper, the beam of her flashlight illuminated strange carvings etched into the walls, symbols twisted into shapes both familiar and alien. And then she saw it, a pedestal in the center of the room bearing a single object, a blackened, leather-bound book. Against her better judgment, Sarah opened the book. Pages crumbled beneath her touch, revealing handwritten notes and diagrams detailing rituals intended to bind the living to the dead. At the very center, a phrase written in bold letters sent chills down her spine. Blood calls to blood. Before she could react, the flashlight flickered and died. Darkness enveloped her, punctuated by soft, rhythmic breathing. Something, or someone, was there with her. Sarah screamed, dropping the book and scrambling toward the stairs. But the footsteps behind her were faster, louder. By the time she reached the surface, she was alone, but forever changed. Sarah's obsession with the Halberts only deepened after that night. She spent months researching the symbols and rituals, piecing together fragments of a forgotten language. Slowly, she began to understand the true purpose of the cellar. It wasn't just a repository for the dead, it was a gateway, a place where the boundaries between worlds blurred, allowing the spirits of the departed to exert their will on the living. But the more Sarah learned, the more she realized she wasn't alone in her quest. Others had sought to uncover the Halbert secret, and many had paid the ultimate price. Local archives revealed accounts of researchers, historians, and thrill-seekers who had ventured too close to the truth. Some vanished without a trace. Others returned broken, their minds shattered by what they had seen. And yet, Sarah couldn't stop. The whispers in her dreams grew louder, more insistent. They promised answers, if only she dared to listen. One stormy night, Sarah returned to the house. This time she came prepared. Armed with candles, salt, and a camera rigged to record continuously, she descended into the cellar once more. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight, as though awakened by her presence. She placed the blackened book back on the pedestal and recited the incantation she had painstakingly translated. At first, nothing happened. Then the temperature plummeted, and the air grew heavy with the stench of rot. Shadows coalesced into humanoid forms, their faces twisted in agony. Voices erupted around her, overlapping in a cacophony of screams and pleas. Sarah dropped to her knees, clutching her ears, but the sound was inside her head, piercing her thoughts. Through the chaos, one voice rose above the rest. Clear, commanding, familiar. You shouldn't have come back. Sarah froze. She knew that voice. It belonged to Lydia Halbert, the girl who had vanished over a century ago. When Sarah finally regained consciousness, she was lying outside the house, drenched in rain and mud. The camera was gone along with the book, but the memory of what she had seen and heard would haunt her for the rest of her life, because the Halberts weren't just a family cursed by death. They were a family bound by it. And now, Sarah, realized so was she. Sarah Monroe never spoke publicly about what happened in the Halbert cellar that stormy night. But those closest to her noticed a shift. She withdrew from friends and family, spending hours poring over the notes she had salvaged. Her apartment became cluttered with maps, photographs, and sketches of symbols. She claimed to hear voices, faint, but persistent, guiding her toward answers. At first, her colleagues dismissed her behavior as exhaustion or stress. After all, Sarah had always been passionate about uncovering forgotten histories. But this was different. The light in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a haunted intensity. She muttered to herself constantly, her hands trembling as she traced diagrams onto paper. Those who tried to intervene were met with icy silence. "You don't understand," she would snap, slamming books shut. "They're waiting." By 2001, Sarah's obsession reached a fever pitch. She purchased a plot of land adjacent to Hollow Hill, citing historical preservation as her motive. Neighbors dismissed her as eccentric, until construction workers unearthed something unexpected. A mass grave containing dozens of bodies, many bearing marks consistent with ritualistic mutilation. Among them were artifacts linked to the Halberts, including fragments of the blackened book. News of the discovery spread quickly, reigniting interest in the Halbert legend. Amateur historians and paranormal investigators flocked to the site, eager to document its mysteries. Yet none stayed for long. Reports of equipment malfunctions, sudden illnesses, and inexplicable accidents plagued the area. Many claimed to feel an overwhelming sense of dread, as though the land itself resisted intrusion. Despite the dangers, Sarah pressed on. She believed the spirits of the Halbert dead were trying to communicate, not to harm, but to warn. Late one night, while reviewing audio recordings, she isolated a chilling message: "Stop digging." Ignoring the warning, Sarah organized a team to excavate further. What they found defied logic. Beneath the graves lay a network of tunnels, their walls covered in the same symbols seen in the cellar. At the heart of the labyrinth stood a massive stone altar, stained with rust-colored streaks. Surrounding it were skeletal remains arranged in a perfect circle. As Sarah approached the altar, her vision blurred. Memories flooded her mind, images of the Halberts performing rituals, chanting in unison, their faces contorted with ecstasy and terror. Then came the realization. She wasn't merely uncovering their secrets. She was becoming part of them. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They filled her dreams, her waking moments, until there was no escape. Sarah began carrying the blackened book everywhere, clutching it like a lifeline. Its pages seemed to pulse beneath her fingers, as though alive. Symbols etched themselves into her skin, appearing overnight as red, raised welts. She stopped eating, sleeping, speaking to anyone outside her immediate circle. Her reflection in the mirror looked gaunt, hollow-eyed. But worse, it sometimes moved independently, staring back at her with a cruel smile. One evening, Sarah received a visitor, a man named Daniel Graves. A historian specializing in occult practices arrived unannounced at her door. He introduced himself as someone familiar with the Halbert Curse and offered his assistance. Skeptical but desperate, Sarah allowed him inside. Daniel examined the artifacts and listened intently as Sarah recounted her experiences. When she finished, he sighed heavily. "You've opened something that should have stayed buried," he said. "The Halberts didn't just preserve their dead, they bound them. Their bloodline acts as a conduit, keeping the spirits tethered to this world. And now," he hesitated, "now, you've become part of that bloodline." Sarah laughed bitterly. "That's impossible. I'm not related to them." "You don't need to be," Daniel replied. "The rituals transcend genetics. Anyone who interacts with the artifacts risks being drawn in. You've already started showing signs, the symbols, the voices, the visions. If we don't act soon, you'll lose yourself completely." For the first time in months, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Together, she and Daniel devised a plan to sever the connection. Using a combination of ancient texts and modern research, they identified a ritual capable of releasing the trapped spirits. It required 3 components: fire, salt, and blood. On the night of the ritual, Sarah and Daniel returned to the Halbert estate. The air was thick with tension as they descended into the cellar, armed with candles, matches, and a vial of Sarah's own blood. Placing the blackened book on the pedestal, they lit the candles and began reciting the incantation. At first, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled and a low hum filled the room. Shadows coalesced into shapes, twisting and writhing like smoke caught in a draft. Voices erupted, overlapping in a cacophony of screams and pleas. Sarah clutched the edge of the pedestal, her knuckles white. Beads of sweat rolled down her face as the symbols carved into her skin began to burn. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Lydia Halbert, or what remained of her. Her form wavered between solid and translucent, her expression unreadable. She stepped closer, her gaze locking onto Sarah's. "You think you can undo what has been done?" Lydia's voice echoed in Sarah's mind, bypassing her ears entirely. "You are ours now. Bound by blood. Bound by choice." "No," Sarah shouted, clutching the vial of blood. With trembling hands, she poured it over the book, then threw a handful of salt onto the flames. The fire roared, turning an unnatural shade of green. The shadows screamed, recoiling from the light. Lydia's form flickered, her features twisting in rage. "This isn't over," she hissed before vanishing into the darkness. The tremors ceased, and the room fell silent. Exhausted, Sarah collapsed to her knees. For the first time in months, the whispers were gone. But as Daniel helped her to her feet, he hesitated. "Something doesn't feel right," he murmured. "We may have released the spirits, but at what cost?" Sarah didn't answer. She stared at her hands, which still bore faint traces of the symbols. Though the voices were silent, she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't truly gone. They were simply waiting. In the weeks that followed, Sarah attempted to return to normalcy. She donated the remaining artifacts to a secure archive, hoping to distance herself from the horrors she had uncovered. But the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. The symbols on her skin faded, only to reappear during moments of stress. And though she tried to convince herself otherwise, she knew the truth. The Halbert Curse hadn't ended. It had merely shifted. One night, as Sarah lay in bed, she heard it again, the soft, rhythmic breathing. It came from the corner of the room, growing louder with each passing second. Slowly she turned her head and saw him. A figure stood in the shadows, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by darkness. In his hand he held the blackened book. "Blood calls to blood," he whispered, his voice echoing through the room. And then he smiled. The figure in the shadows didn't move. He simply stood there, watching Sarah with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The blackened book in his hand seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat as she struggled to sit up, her body trembling with a mix of fear and exhaustion. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man tilted his head, his face still obscured by darkness. "You already know," he replied, his voice low and guttural. It wasn't a single voice. It was many, layered together in a discordant harmony that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "We've been waiting." Sarah's mind raced. Waiting. For what? For her? She wanted to scream, to run, but her limbs felt like lead. The symbols on her skin began to burn again, glowing faintly in the dim light. She clutched at her arms, trying to rub them away, but they only grew brighter. The man stepped forward, revealing his face, or rather, what remained of it. His features were distorted, stretched unnaturally, as though something beneath the surface was trying to break free. His eyes were hollow voids filled with a swirling, unnatural darkness. He smiled, a grotesque, toothy grin that sent waves of nausea through Sarah. "You tried to break the bond," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "But blood calls to blood. You cannot escape us." Before Sarah could react, the room plunged into chaos. The walls seemed to twist and warp, the symbols carved into the stone glowing with an eerie red light. Shadows writhed across the ceiling, coalescing into grotesque shapes that loomed over her. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and a chorus of voices erupted around her, pleading, screaming, laughing, all overlapping in a maddening cacophony. Sarah pressed her hands to her ears, but the sound was inside her head, piercing her thoughts. She screamed, tears streaming down her face as the man reached out and placed the blackened book into her lap. The moment it touched her, searing pain shot through her body. Her vision blurred, and she collapsed onto the bed, unconscious. When Sarah awoke, she was no longer in her apartment. She found herself standing in the middle of the Halbert estate's cellar, surrounded by flickering candles. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and rot, and the whispers were louder than ever. They weren't just in her mind now. They were everywhere, echoing off the walls, filling the space with their relentless murmurs. She looked down and saw that the blackened book was still in her hands. Its pages fluttered open of their own accord, revealing intricate diagrams and incantations written in a language she couldn't understand. Yet somehow, she knew exactly what they meant. The knowledge flooded her mind, overwhelming and suffocating, until she thought she might drown in it. "You are ours now." The voices whispered in unison, bound by blood, bound by choice. Sarah dropped to her knees, clutching her head. "No," she screamed. "I broke the ritual. I destroyed the connection." A cold laugh echoed through the room. "Destruction is not released," the voices replied. "You have awakened something far greater than yourself. Something ancient. Something eternal." The ground beneath her feet began to tremble. Cracks spread across the stone floor, releasing tendrils of smoke that coiled around her. Legs like serpents. The symbols on her skin flared with heat, burning so intensely that she cried out in agony. Through the haze of pain, she saw figures emerging from the cracks, shadows that solidified into humanoid forms. Their faces were twisted masks of agony and rage, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. One of the figures stepped forward. It was Ezekiel Halbert, his expression grim and resolute. "You should have let us rest," he said, his voice booming like thunder. "Now you carry our burden." Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want any of this." "It matters not," Ezekiel replied. "The bond has been forged. You are the keeper of our legacy. Now." The other figures closed in around her, their forms flickering between solid and translucent. Sarah tried to back away, but her body wouldn't obey her commands. She was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear and pain. As the figures surrounded her, their voices merged into a single deafening roar. The blackened book floated out of her hands, hovering in the air above the altar. Its pages turned rapidly, stopping on a single diagram, a complex web of symbols radiating outward from a central point. A drop of blood fell from Sarah's palm, onto the page, sizzling as it made contact. The room erupted in blinding light. Sarah screamed as the energy surged through her, filling every fiber of her being. Visions flooded her mind. Images of the Halberts performing rituals, binding spirits, sacrificing lives, all connected by a thread of crimson that led directly to her. She saw herself standing in the center of the web, the threads wrapping around her like chains. When the light faded, Sarah was alone. The cellar was silent, the candles extinguished. The blackened book lay closed on the altar, its cover smooth and unmarked. The symbols on her skin had vanished, leaving behind faint scars that glowed faintly in the dim light. For a moment she thought it was over, that she had survived. But then she heard it, the soft, rhythmic breathing. It came from within her, echoing in her chest like a second heartbeat. And she realized the truth. The curse hadn't ended. It had evolved. In the weeks that followed, Sarah tried to piece her life back together. She avoided mirrors, unable to bear the sight of her reflection, which now seemed distorted and unfamiliar. Her dreams were plagued by visions of the Halberts, their faces contorted with rage and despair. The whispers never fully disappeared. They lingered at the edges of her consciousness, growing louder whenever she was alone. Despite her efforts to resist, Sarah found herself drawn back to Hollow Hill. The pull was irresistible, almost magnetic. It wasn't curiosity, it was compulsion. She couldn't explain why, but she knew she had unfinished business there. One night, under the cover of darkness, she returned to the estate. The house loomed before her, its windows dark and foreboding. Yet she felt no fear, only purpose. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. The whispers greeted her like old friends, guiding her toward the cellar. As she descended, the stairs, the symbols carved into the walls began to glow, illuminating her path. At the bottom, she found the altar and the blackened book. Without hesitation, she opened it. The pages were blank, save for a single sentence scrawled in bold letters. The bloodline continues. Sarah smiled, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. She placed her hands on the altar and closed her eyes, letting the voices wash over her. They weren't hostile anymore, they were welcoming, comforting even. She understood now. She wasn't a victim. She was a vessel, and the Halberts' legacy would live on through her. The days following Sarah's return to the Halbert estate blurred together in a haze of ritual and revelation. She no longer questioned why she was drawn to the house or why the whispers felt like old friends guiding her steps. They simply were. Her reflection in the cracked mirror of the attic revealed a woman who looked both familiar and alien. Her eyes, once warm and curious, now gleamed with an unnatural intensity, as though lit from within by something ancient and insatiable. The scars on her arms pulsed faintly, glowing red whenever she touched the blackened book. It wasn't pain, it was power. Sarah had become the keeper of the Halbert legacy, but the role came with responsibilities far greater than she could have imagined. The spirits didn't merely whisper, they commanded, and she obeyed, not out of fear, but because their voices resonated deep within her soul, aligning perfectly with her own desires. Or perhaps they were her desires now. She couldn't tell anymore. At first, the changes were subtle. Neighbors reported strange occurrences near Hollow Hill, lights flickering in the abandoned house, shadows moving behind boarded-up windows. Disembodied cries carried on the wind, but soon the disturbances spread beyond the property line. Livestock began to die under mysterious circumstances, their bodies found mutilated, marked with symbols eerily similar to those carved into the cellar walls. Crops wilted overnight, leaving fields barren and lifeless. Even the air seemed heavier, tinged with the metallic tang of blood and decay. People started avoiding the area altogether, whispering about curses and restless spirits. Some claimed to see figures wandering the woods at night, tall, gaunt shapes with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Others spoke of hearing faint chanting, rising and falling like waves, emanating from the direction of the Halbert estate. The townsfolk begged local authorities to investigate, but no one dared step foot near Hollow Hill after sunset. Those who did never returned. Sarah watched it all unfold with detached curiosity. She spent her nights performing rituals in the cellar, guided by visions that flooded her mind unbidden. The blackened book became her constant companion, its pages revealing new incantations and diagrams each time she opened it. Symbols etched themselves into her skin overnight, appearing as raised welts that burned with cold fire. They weren't random. They formed patterns, maps, instructions, and Sarah followed them without hesitation. One evening, as she traced a particularly intricate design onto the altar, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. Cracks spread across the stone floor, releasing tendrils of smoke that coiled around her legs like serpents. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a deafening cacophony that filled the room. Shadows writhed across the walls, taking shape as humanoid figures with distorted faces and glowing eyes. They reached toward her, their hands clawing at the air, but they couldn't touch her. Not anymore. "You are the bridge," the voices whispered in unison. "The link between worlds. Through you, we will walk again." Sarah smiled, closing her eyes as the energy surged through her. She felt weightless, untethered from reality, as though she existed simultaneously in two places at once. Visions flooded her mind, images of the past and future colliding in a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. She saw herself standing atop Hollow Hill, the land stretching out before her like a canvas waiting to be painted. Except this wasn't art. It was conquest. When the vision faded, Sarah found herself kneeling on the cellar floor, her hands pressed against the altar. The symbols on her skin glowed brighter than ever, casting an eerie red light across the room. She rose slowly, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Something inside her had shifted. A door had been unlocked, a barrier broken. The curse wasn't just spreading. It was evolving. Over the next few weeks, Sarah ventured farther from the estate, testing the limits of her newfound power. She visited neighboring farms, speaking softly to the owners about strange dreams and premonitions. Most dismissed her as eccentric, but some, those whose families had ties to the Halberts, felt an inexplicable pull toward her words. They invited her into their homes, offering food and shelter in exchange for guidance. Sarah accepted graciously, biding her time until the moment was right. It always happened the same way. Late at night, when the household slept, Sarah would slip into the basement or attic depending on the layout of the house. She brought only the blackened book and a vial of her own blood, which she poured onto the floor in intricate patterns. As the symbols flared to life, the air grew thick with anticipation. Shadows coalesced into shapes, their forms flickering between solid and translucent. Whispers filled the room, echoing off the walls as the spirits emerged from the ether. By morning, the family would awaken to find one of their own missing. Sometimes it was the youngest child, other times an elderly relative. Their absence left gaping holes in the household, both literal and emotional. Those who dared search for answers found only fragments, scraps of clothing, locks of hair, personal belongings bearing the same symbols that haunted Hollow Hill. And always, there was the lingering sense of being watched, even in broad daylight. Word of these disappearances spread quickly, igniting panic throughout the countryside. Town meetings devolved into shouting matches as people demanded answers. Some blamed Sarah, pointing to her sudden reappearance and connection to the Halbert estate. Others accused outsiders, claiming travelers or drifters were responsible. No one suspected the truth, that the curse had taken root in the very soil itself, spreading like a cancer through the veins of the land. Sarah observed it all from afar, her expression unreadable. She didn't care about the accusations or the fear. They were necessary sacrifices. The spirits needed vessels, and the living provided the perfect conduits. Each disappearance strengthened the bond, drawing more entities into the mortal realm. Soon, the entire region would feel their presence. But Sarah wasn't content to let the curse grow organically. She wanted control, power, revenge. For years, she had been mocked, dismissed, ignored. Now she wielded a force that defied logic and reason, and she intended to use it. Her first major act came during the annual Harvest Festival, a celebration that drew hundreds of locals to the town square. Booths lined the streets selling pies, cider, and handmade crafts. Children ran laughing through the crowd, their faces painted with bright colors. Music drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of roasted corn and wood smoke. It was a scene of joy and community until Sarah arrived. She walked silently through the festival, her presence unnoticed at first. People greeted her warmly, assuming she had come to join the festivities. But as she passed, their smiles faltered. The laughter died away, replaced by an oppressive silence. The lanterns strung above the square flickered and dimmed, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. A cold wind swept through the crowd, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of decay. Then the screaming began. Figures emerged from the darkness. Tall, gaunt shapes with hollow eyes and elongated limbs. They moved with unnatural grace, their movements jerky yet precise. The townsfolk scattered, trampling each other in their desperation to escape. But there was nowhere to run. The spirits surrounded them, cutting off every exit. Their voices rose in a chorus of screams and chants, drowning out the sounds of panic and despair. Sarah stood at the center of it all, her arms raised, high. The symbols on her skin blazed with crimson light, illuminating her face in stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. She spoke a single word, her voice amplified to an unearthly pitch. Obey. And just like that, the violence stopped. The spirits froze mid-motion, their forms wavering like smoke caught in a draft. The townsfolk collapsed to their knees, trembling with fear and exhaustion. Their eyes glazed over, empty and vacant, as though something or someone had taken control of their minds. When the dust settled, Sarah lowered her arms and surveyed the scene. Bodies littered the square, some unconscious, others catatonic. The spirits lingered nearby, their forms fading slightly but remaining visible. They turned to her, awaiting further instruction. Sarah smiled, her expression cold and calculating. "Bring them," she said softly. "We have work to do." As dawn broke over Hollow Hill, the town lay silent and still. Windows were dark, doors bolted shut. The streets were empty, save for the occasional figure shambling aimlessly, their movements mechanical and devoid of purpose. The curse had awakened, and it showed no signs of stopping. Sarah stood at the edge of the hill, gazing down at the devastation below. Her reflection in a puddle of rainwater stared back at her, distorted and unfamiliar. She no longer recognized herself, but that didn't matter. Recognition was irrelevant. What mattered was the legacy, the bloodline, that now flowed through her veins. And it was hungry. The days following the harvest festival were unlike anything the region had ever experienced. Entire families disappeared overnight, their homes abandoned and left eerily silent. Livestock rotted in fields, crops turned to ash, and the skies above Hollow Hill remained perpetually overcast, as though the sun itself refused to shine on what lay beneath. Those who ventured too close to the estate claimed to see shadows moving within the house, tall, gaunt figures pacing behind boarded-up windows, their glowing eyes watching, waiting. Sarah Monroe was no longer just a name whispered in fear. She had become a legend, a boogeyman invoked to frighten children into obedience. But Sarah wasn't hiding anymore. She walked openly through the desolate streets, her presence commanding both awe and terror. The symbols etched into her skin pulsed faintly with crimson light, marking her as something otherworldly, a bridge between worlds, a vessel for powers beyond comprehension. Yet despite her newfound dominance, Sarah felt incomplete. The spirits obeyed her commands without question, but they weren't hers to control, not entirely. They served a higher purpose, one she could only glimpse in fleeting visions. Each ritual brought clarity, yet also confusion. The blackened book revealed new incantations daily, its pages shifting and changing as though alive, and always there was the whispering, the constant maddening murmur of voices urging her forward, deeper into the abyss. But where were they leading her? What did they want? One evening, as twilight bled into darkness, Sarah returned to the Halbert estate. The house loomed before her, its silhouette jagged and menacing against the stormy sky. Lightning illuminated the boarded-up windows, casting flickering shadows across the yard. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and the whispers grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of voices that filled her mind. She descended into the cellar, the blackened book clutched tightly in her hands. The symbols carved into the walls glowed faintly, guiding her path. At the center of the room stood the altar, its surface etched with intricate designs that seemed to shift and writhe under her gaze. Placing the book upon it, Sarah began to chant, her voice low and steady, rising in pitch with each syllable. The ground trembled beneath her feet, cracks spreading across the stone floor as tendrils of smoke coiled around her legs. The shadows converged, taking shape as humanoid figures, with hollow eyes and elongated limbs. Their forms flickered between solid and translucent, their movements jerky yet precise. They surrounded her, reaching out with clawed hands that passed through her body like mist. Yet Sarah felt no fear. She welcomed them, embracing the cold, energy that surged through her veins. "You have done well." The voices whispered in unison, their tones layered and discordant. "But your work is not yet complete." Sarah frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What more do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice trembling with frustration. "I've given everything. My blood, my soul, my life. What else can I offer?" The figures paused, their movements halting as though considering her words. Then slowly one of them stepped forward. Its form solidified, revealing a face that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. It was Ezekiel Halbert, or rather what remained of him. His features were stretched and distorted, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He smiled, though the expression held no warmth. "Your sacrifice is not enough," he said, his voice booming like thunder. "To truly break the veil, we require a greater offering, one that binds the living to the dead forever." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "What kind of offering?" Ezekiel's smile widened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "A child." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She staggered backward, clutching the edge of the altar for support. Her mind raced, trying to process what she had just heard. A child? No, it couldn't be. She had sacrificed so much already. Her sanity, her humanity, her very identity. Surely that was enough. But deep down, she knew the truth. The curse wasn't satisfied. It would never be satisfied. It fed on suffering, on loss, on despair. And if she wanted to maintain control, if she wanted to survive, she had no choice but to comply. The next morning, Sarah set out into the countryside, her steps deliberate and unhurried. She visited neighboring farms, speaking softly to the owners about strange dreams and premonitions. As before, some dismissed her as eccentric, but others, those whose families had ties to the Halberts, felt an inexplicable pull toward her. Words. They invited her into their homes, trusting her implicitly. It was during one such visit that Sarah found her target. A young girl, barely 6 years old, with wide, curious eyes and a mop of unruly curls. Her name was Emily, and she reminded Sarah of herself at that age, innocent, eager to learn, full of questions about the world. But Sarah pushed those thoughts aside. Emily wasn't a person anymore. She was a tool, a means to an end. That night, as the household slept, Sarah crept into Emily's room. The child stirred slightly as Sarah approached, her tiny hand clutching a stuffed rabbit close to her chest. For a moment, Sarah hesitated, her resolve wavering. But then the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. "Do it," they urged. "Complete the bond. Secure your legacy." With trembling hands, Sarah reached out and touched Emily's forehead. The girl's eyes fluttered open, meeting Sarah's gaze without fear. "Are you here to play?" she asked sleepily, her voice soft and innocent. Sarah forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "We're going to play a very special game," and with that, she placed a hand over Emily's mouth, muffling her cries as the symbols on her skin flared with crimson light. The child's body went limp, her spirit pulled into the ether like smoke caught in a draft. When it was done, Sarah carried Emily's lifeless form back to the Halbert estate, cradling her gently as though she were merely sleeping. In the cellar, the ritual unfolded with terrifying precision. Sarah laid Emily's body on the altar, arranging her limbs in a perfect circle. The spirits gathered around, their forms flickering with anticipation. As Sarah chanted, the ground trembled, releasing waves of energy that radiated outward in concentric rings. The symbols etched into her skin burned brighter than ever, searing themselves into the air like brands. Then, with a deafening roar, the veil shattered. The room erupted in blinding light, forcing Sarah to shield her eyes. When the brilliance faded, she found herself standing in a void, a vast, endless expanse of swirling darkness punctuated by pinpricks of light. The spirits surrounded her, their forms solid and imposing. Among them stood Ezekiel Halbert, his expression unreadable. "It is done," he declared, his voice reverberating through the void. "The bond is complete. The living and the dead are one." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had succeeded. The curse was no longer a chain, it was a bridge, and she was its keeper. But as the realization settled over her, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. She stumbled, clutching her head as pain shot through her skull. Visions flooded her mind, images of the future, of generations yet unborn bound to the same fate. She saw herself standing atop Hollow Hill, her reflection distorted and alien. Except it wasn't her anymore. It was something else, something ancient and eternal. When Sarah looked up, the spirits were gone. She was alone in the void, the weight of eternity pressing down on her shoulders. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. Her body dissolved into smoke, merging with the darkness until there was nothing left. Back in the mortal realm, the Halbert estate stood silent and still. The townsfolk avoided the area, claiming the land itself felt cursed. Weeds swallowed the yard, vines crept over the windows, and the roof collapsed under the weight of neglect. It seemed the family's dark legacy had been erased by time, but history has a way of resurfacing. Decades later, a group of urban explorers stumbled upon the ruins. Drawn by tales of hauntings and mysterious disappearances, they documented their findings in grainy photographs and shaky video footage. What they captured shocked even the skeptics: shadowy figures moving in the background, disembodied whispers echoing through empty halls, and inexplicable cold spots that defied explanation. As they prepared to leave, one member of the group, a young woman named Claire, noticed something odd. Beneath a pile of rubble in the cellar, she uncovered a small leather-bound book. Its cover was smooth and unmarked, save for a single phrase scrawled in bold letters: "Blood calls to blood." Claire stared at the book, her fingers trembling, as she traced the words. Then, against her better judgment, she opened it and the whispers began again. The end.